Alright, so in this video I'll be recapping the game between the Brooklyn Nets and the Philadelphia 76ers. As we know, the Nets went to Philadelphia and beat the brakes off the Sixers. It was the first game between James Harden and KD and Kyrie ever since the split up. It was Ben Simmons' first game back in Philly. They were booing him. They were getting on his helmet. It was a playoff-like atmosphere. It was very intense, and it was a very entertaining game. It was the funnest game I've watched all season. First quarter was very entertaining, a lot of drawing, a lot of back and forth. Really felt like a playoff game. The first half was entertaining. The whole first half was entertaining, but by halftime, it was a blowout. I watched the third quarter just to see if the Sixers would get hot from three, make any adjustments, but by late in the third quarter, I had turned that game off. There was nothing to see. KD and Kyrie, those are the type of guys that even if you make a little run, they're the two best get-a-bucket guys in the NBA. Kevin Durant is certainly the best get-a-bucket guy in the NBA. And if you make a couple shots and you catch fire, you go on a little 7-0 run, he's gonna shut that down. They're going to give him the ball, call an ISO, he's going to make a basket, and he's going to calm the storm. And that's what KD and Kyrie did every time the Sixers made a little noise. That's what KD and Kyrie do every time they're on the court with each other. If both these brothers are healthy, they're gonna stop that shit. They're able to get a bucket at any time. So I'm going to let Skip and Shannon talk about it, and I'll chime in.
Brooklyn shot the ball extremely well, Skip. I mean, they're 11 for 20 in the first half, 64% from the floor. When you outscore your opponent by 24 from the three-point line, when you have those kind of guys, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get back into the ball game if you're down by 21 at the half and you got KD and Kyrie locked in, and now Seth Curry, he can't miss.
Yeah, the Nets are the wrong team to fall behind to because they can score. So if they catch a lead on you and you're trying to climb back, one of their guys is going to hit shots, and you're not going to be able to cut into that lead. You're just not.
You're going to face an uphill climb. Last night, Brooklyn was the better team. They played extremely well, and as Jen mentioned in the read, Skip, James Harden couldn't buy a basket. It looked like one of those situations where they played Golden State, Skip. You remember he's like, 3 of 24, and they just kept chucking up three after three after three.
Yeah, well, the dude started the game like 1 of 12. He was 1 for his first 12. He was stinking up the joint. He always stinks up the joint in big games. I'm not going to get into the whole MK Ultra. I'm not going to get into that whole angle right now. But for those of you brothers who are familiar, you might know what I'm getting at when I say maybe that's just part of his programming. Or maybe he's just mentally weak. Maybe he's just a fragile dude. Maybe he's a dude who, in pressurized moments, he just shrinks because every time this dude has a big game, he just falls short every single time. There's not an athlete right now. I don't think there's an athlete in any major sport who just like declines as much as he does in a pivotal moment. Like he just shrinks every single time. And I've been consistent with saying this. If you see my video when I talked about the trade, James Harden for Ben Simmons, I said that the Nets won the trade because they're getting multiple starters. They're getting Ben Simmons. They're getting Seth Curry, who played great against his former team, against his father-in-law. They got Andre Drummond, who played great defense against Joel Embiid. And the Sixers have some problems, man. James Harden, he's not going to get the whistle in the playoffs. He's not able to defend anybody in the playoffs. You got Matisse Thybulle. He's a great defender. He's a guy who you need. You're going to need him to stick on to KD or to stick on Kyrie. But Matisse Thybulle, he can't score at all. So now that's a guy who they can sag off of. And they can send double teams at Joel Embiid because they can leave Thybulle open. You can leave Thybulle open and dare him to shoot the ball. And if you put Danny Green in, because Danny Green can shoot, Danny Green has hit clutch three-pointers before. Danny Green just doesn't have it defensively the way that he used to. KD will light Danny Green up. I mean, KD will light anybody up, but he'll have his way with Danny Green. So that's going to be a problem. Tobias Harris and James Harden, they have the worst chemistry out of any two basketball players in the NBA right now. Tobias does not play well with James Harden. People think Tobias Harris is a spot-up shooter. He is not a spot-up shooter. Tobias Harris is a guy who wants to put the ball on the floor a couple times. He's a guy who wants to get into the mid-post sometimes. He's a guy who wants to be found coming off a screen sometimes, 1-2 dribble, maybe working a little pick and roll. He is not a spot-up shooter. He doesn't work with James Harden just pounding the ball all day long. You got Maxey. Maxey is playing the off guard. Now, Maxey and Harden actually play better with each other than I thought they would. I thought Maxey might struggle not getting to dribble as much as he would like, but he's coming off the ball and he's posting up, spotting up at the wing, And when James Harden feeds him the ball, he's catching the ball with energy. He's catching the ball, he's jumping into the ball, and he's going straight into his dribble drive. So it works. It's kind of like a change of pace where you have that slower. It's kind of like having two running backs. I think of them almost how I think of Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, like with James Harden being Zeke and getting most of the carries and kind of pounding teams and with physicality and with strength. But then Tony Pollard, who's Maxey in this scenario, just comes in with the speed and with the burst, and it kind of switches up the tempo a little bit. So I like their pairing. And I think Maxey makes up for some of the defensive deficiencies that James Harden has, because Maxey actually has the ability to stay in front of his man. But this Sixers team is in trouble, dude. Like I said, you can sag off a Thibault. Tobias and Harden don't play well together. Harden shrinks in big moments. Doc Rivers is the worst coach in the NBA. When I say the worst coach, I mean, look, he has a good resume. He has a resume or whatever. I can't even say good resume, but he has a resume where he's done some good things in the league. But Doc Rivers, I don't know if there's anybody who, when things get rough, a coach that you would want to have on your team less than Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers makes no adjustments. He's not going to know what to do when times get tough. So, yeah, there's major problems in Philadelphia.
And nothing seemed to go in. And it seemed like everything that the Brooklyn Nets put up was going into the basket. They couldn't miss from three early on. Give those guys credit. They did a great job. Joel Embiid, I thought Joel Embiid was going to shoot 40 free throws last night. Skip, he had 13 in the first quarter. And I'm like, well damn, he's single-handedly keeping them in the game by just...
Yeah, he was a force. Drummond played very good defense on him, but Embiid's still going to be a force. And you can live with that. You can live with Embiid balling. As long as James Harden doesn't ball and you limit the role players, you can live with Embiid eating. They're just going to have to... If the Nets and the Sixers face each other in the first round or later on in the playoffs, the Nets are just going to have to deal with that.
Just fouling them. But they did a great job all of a sudden. They played him without fouling him. They got their hand in there, got balls out. And James Harden, he was getting frustrated because he normally gets the calls that he didn't get last night. Skip, you know how he likes to go to the basket, flail thing, throws his arms up in the air. They normally blow the whistle. Well, last night they let him play a little bit last night.
Yeah, last night they let him play, and in the playoffs they're going to let him play. So he got to get used to that. And he's too late in his career. He hasn't made that adjustment. I don't expect him to.
And I think that kind of affected James Harden. He looked like the James Harden that we've seen a couple of times in the playoff games. He's cold early, Skip. Doesn't seem to get into a flow of the ball game, and it kind of took him out of his ball game. Last night, 3 of 17, 3 of 7 from the three.
With Kyrie Irving guarding him. And that just proved to me that those rumors were true. When we heard the rumors that Kyrie was busting James Harden's ass in practice and he was calling him washed or he was calling him fat or whatever the case is, it just shows that those rumors are true. Like, Kyrie was locking up James Harden, and people don't know Kyrie as a defender. When Kyrie wants to play defense, he's a real good defender. Kyrie was a good defender in Cleveland. He checked Steph Curry a lot in those finals. He's been a good defender with the Nets during his time with the Nets. The only time Kyrie didn't play defense was when he was in Boston. When he was in Boston and all those guys were just playing selfish basketball, none of them were playing defense. They were all just focused on doing what they had to do, except for Marcus Smart. Marcus Smart, he eats off of the defensive end. But everybody else, Tatum, Kyrie, Brown, they were focused on scoring. The Morris brother, they were all just focused on scoring. Gordon Hayward. So that was the only time Kyrie didn't play defense. But Kyrie stepped up. He knows James Harden's style of play. He was locking that shit up. He was giving James Harden buckets on the other end when James Harden was checking him. But James Harden was running away from him most of the night. Kyrie, there was never a time where I would take James Harden over Kyrie. Out of respect, sometimes I'd put him ahead on my list because James Harden as a distributor and leading a team, he's taken them farther than Kyrie has leading a team. But there's never been a time where I would take James Harden over Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving just has a way deeper bag than him.
3-point line, he only attempted 2 free throws. James Harden is normally good for at least at the bare minimum. He's not what he was early in Houston where he's going to the line 11, 12 times a game. But he normally goes to the free throw line, Skip, 6, 7, 8 times a game. Only 2. I thought they did a good job of that. I think Steve Nash said, look, guys, let's keep these guys off the free throw line. They didn't do that early with Joel Embiid. But I thought the Brooklyn Nets played really, really well. We know what they represent offensively, especially KD and Kyrie. Now, if you're going to get this kind of production from Seth Curry, and you're going to get, who is this? James Jones? James Johnson?
Yeah.
Go come out the bench
He
and
made
give
all
you
3 of his threes.
Yeah, he gonna give you 16.
No, he's been around.
Yeah.
He can play. He is a veteran difference maker for a good team.
He does a lot of the dirty work.
He does.
He'll defend LeBron James. He'll try to hold on against Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's his job. Yeah, like you said, he does a lot of the dirty work, a lot of the grunt work. Get you some rebounds. He'll give you some tough, hard fouls. But I just thought the Brooklyn Nets came out and asserted themselves early.
The Nets have the right role players around KD and Kyrie. When Ben Simmons comes back, he's going to fit well with them, I believe. Seth Curry, Patty Mills, Drummond. Drummond's just a beast on the boards, one of the greatest rebounders we've seen in NBA history, one of the great noses for the ball in NBA history. They have the right guys around them because Joe Harris couldn't make a shot to save his fucking life. You know, he couldn't throw it in the ocean in the playoffs last season. He was the reason why they lost to the Bucks. Honestly, if he just hits 1-3 against the Bucks in Game 7, if he hits just a couple more threes throughout that series, they're beating the Milwaukee Bucks. The Nets were supposed to win that series, even without Kyrie, even with James Harden playing hobbled. They should have beat the Bucks if Joe Harris just could have made something. So Patty Mills, Seth Curry, these are proven shooters. These are guys who are going to make the right play. The Nets just have a great cast around their star players, guys who fit well.
Let them know, bro, it's not going to be that type of game tonight. Kevin Durant said, they were playing inspired basketball for Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons had no impact on this game. Ben Simmons had nothing because Ben Simmons has been on this team for the last, basically a month now, and they were still losing ball games. But I want to give, it's not so much what the Sixers didn't do.
Yeah, they weren't playing inspired because of Ben Simmons. They were playing inspired because they wanted to whoop Harden's ass. Truthfully, that's what it was. They wanted to whoop Harden's ass. KD and Kyrie both were a little salty about the whole James Harden situation, and they wanted to show him, hey, dude, we're going to ball with or without you. So they proved it. They proved that both of them are better players than James Harden. And, in a 7-game series, if these teams play each other, KD's the best player on the court. By default, I'll give it to Joel Embiid second, but Kyrie's third. And in the clutch moments, Embiid played horrible in this game. Embiid has an injury, he's injury prone. Kyrie's injury prone too, but Embiid's injury prone. He's a big guy. And I would not be surprised if Kyrie had a better series than him too. But, I'd go KD, Embiid second by default. I'd go Kyrie third before I go James Harden. That's my top 4 if these guys play each other in a series. And Ben Simmons didn't really have anything to do with KD and Kyrie wanting to go after James Harden. But the Philly fans booing them and just setting up that type of environment, I think it amped them. It amped them up a little bit. It gave them a little juice. It turned them up a little bit, and it made them want to play with a little more intensity. So Ben Simmons helped in that regard.
Is what the Brooklyn Nets did do. They played extremely well. They shot the ball well, outscored them by 24 in the first half from the three-point line, and Philly could never find a rhythm. Give Brooklyn Nets credit. They were the better team last night.
The Nets are going to have to embrace being the villain, and I think they will. I think Kyrie doesn't give a fuck. I think Kevin Durant doesn't give a fuck. I think there are role players that, like the guys like James Johnson, who Shannon Sharpe was talking about. I think these guys don't really give a fuck. Ben Simmons might have a hard time getting used to that, but I think a lot of these guys on the Nets don't really care about being the villain. And I think they're just going to have to embrace that if they want to reach their full potential this season. They have everybody going against them. They have the media going against them. All the pro-vaxxers are going against them. It's a lot going on with the Nets this season. But if they're able to get everybody together, get Ben Simmons into the thick of things, they're very, very dangerous. The Nets are very dangerous no matter what seed they are.
My turn to answer Jen's question once again. My biggest takeaway from last night was Shannon Sharpe. I keep telling you so. I keep telling you, you better watch the Brooklyn Nets. They're better than the Sixers, especially if they can ever get Ben Simmons right. And at least he was right enough last night to actually put on some practice gear and come out before the game at Philadelphia.
And pass the ball to Patty
Mills, his big brother from Australia, who sat next to him and sort of held his hand all night on the bench. And at least Ben Simmons then donned a Louis Vuitton hockey sweater.
Oh, what you know about that?
in black and gold or yellow gold, and he sat on the bench.
Yes, he did.
And at least he got his feet wet, experienced the negativity that he was going to experience one way or the other going back to Philadelphia.
Right.
And at least in the pregame warm-ups, he got to hear the chants of shoot the ball, or F. Ben Simmons, F. Ben Simmons.
Well,
and a couple of rowdy Sixers fans before the game had to be escorted out, and at least they kept it to a low roar. And as Kevin Durant said, that it's hard for you to chant at Ben Simmons when you're losing by that much.
Right.
So that's what they did, right?
Yeah. Well, Skip, did you see it? He dunked on the end that he passed the shot up, and everybody started clapping for it.
Okay, fine. But to your
Hey, and I know that doesn't sound like much, but those are small steps in the right direction. You got to embrace that energy. Steve Nash is a terrible coach. Steve Nash, just like Doc Rivers, he's another coach that I hammer on. But Steve Nash, I thought that was a smart decision, having Ben Simmons come, having Ben Simmons just experience that, get used to it, get it out the way, get some of those butterflies out the way. Just like it's kind of like Klay Thompson with the Warriors right now. People were getting on Steve Kerr saying that he needs to play Klay less or restrict his minutes, whatever the case is. And I understood it to an extent. You know, Klay was hurting the Warriors early on when he was, struggling a bit. But I understood it to an extent that you just got to get those bad shots out the way because we're going to need you later. So with Steve Nash, he's just like, yo, Ben, you got to just experience it now. You got to take the beating now. It's not going to be the way that, it's not totally the same because you're not playing on the court yet, but you'll take some of it now and you'll get a feeling for just how bad that it's going to be, and we'll get through this, So I thought that was a very smart move on Steve Nash's part.
Your point, the biggest takeaway for me was that the Brooklyn Nets won this game for Ben Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
I believe they came out. You said it had nothing to do with Ben Simmons, but I believe that they were motivated because, as Kevin said,
well, they were motivated to whip James Harden's ass. That's what that was.
After the game, I think all of us were motivated to win this game for Ben Simmons. And then Kyrie went even deeper. He said, so when we played tonight, we definitely felt like Ben was in our heart. If you come at Ben, you come at us. Mm-hmm. So
those are good messages. Those are good optics. Those are things that you have to say as team leaders. KD and Kyrie being the leaders of the team, they have to say that. That's the right thing to say, but they played this hard because they wanted to whip James Harden's ass.
They were possessed to go win this game, and not just win it, but to bury the home team.
Okay, if they were playing for Ben, if Ben was in the heart, where was James Harden? I think they wanted to beat James Harden more than they wanted to win the game for Ben Simmons.
Exactly.
Because remember, Skip, now, he wanted out. He was there. He was like, you know what? I know y'all KD, and I know Kyrie, but I want to go elsewhere. Okay. So don't think that wasn't on their mind either.
I would agree. And to that point, I will read my final tweet of the night for you. As I keep saying on Undisputed, when have you ever been able to trust James Harden in a big game? Tonight, 3-for-17. Better get used to it, Sixers fans. Harden quit his way to the Nets, and now he has quit his way to Philadelphia.
He's going to quit his way out of Houston. He's going to quit his way out of Brooklyn. He's going to quit his way out of Philadelphia. He's going to quit his way out the cheesesteak spots and the local strip clubs. He's going to quit his way out of all that because James Harden is not that guy. James Harden is not a guy who can be the best player on your team. He's the second best player in Philadelphia. He could maybe be the second best player on a championship team, but it doesn't appear that way this season. He's not that kind of guy. So when people talk about these elite level players, the top players in the league, they compare, James Harden did this when he was leading a team versus Kyrie doing this when he was leading a team versus so-and-so doing this, Luka doing this, leading a team. I don't really think of these guys as, who went further leading their team. I look at it as, can we win a championship with you as the best player or not? And once I decide that you're not qualified to be the best player on a championship team, I say, okay, you're a secondary player. You're a secondary player. You're the second best player on a championship team. And then I compare who's a better secondary player. And Kyrie Irving won a championship with the Cleveland Cavaliers as a secondary player. Kyrie Irving was arguably, at times, there were stretches, there were moments where he was the best player on the Cleveland Cavaliers. So James Harden, it's yet to be seen if he can be the secondary player on the championship team. So Kyrie Irving over James Harden.
Okay, So that it was all of the above, all rolled into one. It was for Ben Simmons and against James Harden.
Yes.
And I thought they did a defensive number on a guy they know very well because he was one of them, obviously, and they have practiced. I don't know how much James actually practiced, but they have practiced some against him. Not much lately. And yet he missed, as we know, 14
James Harden's also one of those guys who, besides not coming to practice, he's one of those guys who might come to practice and just ride on the bike. He's going to be late to the team playing, just all that stuff. And that's part of the reason why he wants to be with Daryl Morey is Daryl Morey will let him get away with all that shit. Daryl Morey will treat him like a superstar. He'll give him, a preferential treatment that he won't give other guys, shit that he probably won't even let Joel Embiid get away with. So that's a big reason why Harden wanted to be over there.
shots. 3 of 17.
11 of his first 12.
Wow. And basically shot them out of the game in the first quarter as this.
3 of 17 in his first game, in his first meaningful game with the Philadelphia 76ers. Wow.
Sixers shot, the Nets shot their way, shot the Sixers right out of the game. Can I remind you, as I have before, of some of the fairly recent history of James Harden in big games? Now, these are all playoff games, but I'm going to remind everybody, 2015 at Golden State in the closeout game,
Right.
NBA playoff record, 12 turnovers in that game, okay? 2017 against my San Antonio Spurs in Houston in what was the closeout game. They lost
with
by
no Kawhi.
That one was pathetic.
39 with no Kawhi and no Tony Parker.
Yeah, that was bad.
And in that game, James scored a total of 10 points with 3 rebounds, 7 assists, and 6 more turnovers. Shot 2 of 11 from the floor and 2 of 9 from 3.
Yeah.
Then in the conference finals in 2018, remember, they're up 3-2 on mighty Golden State. CP3 gets hurt, pulled his hamstring, and he's out. And in those final 2 games, here's James's total combined numbers. He's 22 of 53 from the floor. That's 42%. He's 6 of 25 in games 6 and 7 from 3. 6 of 25 from 3. That's 24%. And then we've got 2019 when they're obviously tied with Golden State 2-all. Go look at what happens in games 5 and 6. Just disappear. And then, of course, last year there was the game 7 at home against.
And that game that Skip Bayless is talking about, games 5 and 6 versus the Warriors, that was without Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant got hurt in game 5 in the fourth quarter of game 5, and he didn't return. And the Clay and Steph were able to beat the Rockets. And then game 6, they're tied at halftime, 57-57 in Houston. The Warriors are up 3-2 in Houston. Tie game at halftime. Steph Curry has not scored a point. Steph Curry finishes the game with 32 or 33 points. I believe 33 points. I think he had a 33-point second half. And he sent the Rockets home. He broke that franchise up. He split James Harden and Chris Paul. And Chris Paul went to OKC, and he took that OKC team to the playoffs. They had the same record as the Houston Rockets with James Harden and Russell Westbrook. And they met in the bubble in the first round in the 4-5 matchup, I believe. And it took 7 games for the Rockets to beat OKC, and that Game 7 went down to the wire. And James Harden played horrible in that Game 7. Now, he did get the game-winning block, and he did make some great defensive stops. He made some winning plays, but he played horrible in that game offensively. So James Harden in any closeout game or any big game, he never brings it.
Milwaukee, the KD has toenail on the line shot game.
Yeah, the man was hurt on that.
Okay. Well, he's supposedly dragging around a hamstring that is always there for him.
Yeah, they make the excuse that he was hurt, but James Harden's just one of those guys who I don't really give him that pass. I would give it to another guy, but James Harden being hurt, I don't really want to hear it because Skip has just mentioned he's brought up so many different times where James Harden just fell short.
In his back pocket is his first.
That was the first time he ever had somebody to hamstring. He told me to break it up.
In that game against the eventual champion Milwaukee Bucks, he shoots 5 of 17 and 2 of 12 from 3. Do you see a
Yeah, and Steve Nash played him too many minutes in that game. Once you see that James Harden can't really give you any production, once you see that James Harden on a fast break is dribbling the ball back out because he doesn't want to finish at the rim, like, you got to sub him out and see if somebody else can bring something to the table, right?
Recurring pattern here, Mr. Sharp. I present exhibits A, B, C, D, E, and F. F is in fail, right?
Okay.
And this is James Harden. This is who you love in Philadelphia, who I don't love, because I do trust Joel in big games. I just never quite trust his health.
Well, Joel didn't play particularly well.
You can't trust Embiid's health. You can't trust Doc Rivers' coaching. You can't trust James Harden. There's nothing you really can trust in Philadelphia.
Last night, Skip. He was 5 of 17. He was 2 of 3, but most of his points came from the free throw line. As we mentioned earlier, he did have 19 points.
Nobody can get to the free throw line like Joel.
And then all of a sudden, Skip, he started complaining and wanting calls, and he wasn't getting those calls. And now they're pushing out. They forced 20 turnovers by the Sixers, which turned into 28 points. You turn the ball over, now all of a sudden you get runouts. You get guys laying up. You get Seth Curry running to the three-point line.
Yep.
You see Kyrie ran to the three-point line, hit one right before the end of the first quarter. They played well. Give them credit.
Yeah, Kyrie's been cooking. Kyrie made it a tough week for the people trying to force everybody to get the jab. I mean, Kyrie scored 50 points on the greatest efficiency we've seen in NBA history. His true shooting percentage was the highest of all time for a 50-point game, I believe. And then he follows that up by getting the Sixers out of there in the first 3 quarters. He has like 25 through 3 quarters. He gets them out of there early. He's hitting shots over James Harden, and he's locking James Harden up. So he had a hell of a week, back-to-back games, letting the NBA know that he's coming.
Credit, Skip.
Yep.
For me, I don't want to make it too much about the Sixers because the Sixers didn't play well. But I'd like to think the Brooklyn Nets had a lot to do with that. They did a lot of getting their hands on the ball because they know James Harden has to bring the ball up. They did a great job of getting the ball out without fouling him because they could have easily put him on the free throw line. They didn't do that last night. Give them credit. And you cannot let Kyrie and KD go off because if you let both of those guys get locked in, you got a long, long night. Unless you got a Jason Tatum on the other side or a guy on the other side that's cooking, that's matching them shot for shot, you're going to get blown out like they got blown out last night.
Is it fair to say?
Yeah, so, it's a little bit of both. You got to give the Nets credit because the Nets showed up and they showed out. They stepped up like their star players have done. KD and Kyrie have a history of showing up in the big moments. KD and Kyrie, they step up when it matters most. They play their best ball in the biggest games. And you also have to point towards James Harden just coming through flat, Doc Rivers coming through flat, and Philly that's their personnel right now. Their personnel is a bunch of guys who don't step up when it matters most, except for Joel Embiid. But Joel Embiid, he was like 5 for 17. Now, he got to the free throw line. He got like 15 free throws, so he ended up making his stats look nice or whatever. But he was struggling too. Drummond had him. So I think that the Nets proved that they match up very well with the Sixers. The Nets are a team that nobody wants to face. The Sixers have some glaring weaknesses. The Sixers lost tonight. The night that I'm recording this, March 14th, they lost to Jokic. Jokic came to Philadelphia and beat them. So the Sixers have some problems. They're not winning the championship this year. I said that when the trade occurred. The 76ers are not winning the championship this year. James Harden is not going to win a ring with Joel Embiid. But anyway, this was a good segment with Skip and Shannon. The clip is just too long. I'm going to cut it off here. Thanks for watching. Peace.